Hey everyone, welcome back to our podcast. I'm Sarah, and as always, I'm joined by my awesome co host, Alex.
Hey everyone! We're super excited about today's topic because it's something that so many people want to achieve fluency in a language. Whether you're learning a new language from scratch or trying to polish up the skills you already have, fluency is often seen as the ultimate goal.
Absolutely, Alex. I think fluency means different things to different people. Some might think of fluency as being able to hold a conversation comfortably, while others might see it as being able to think in that language without translating in their heads. What do you think fluency means?
That's a great point. For me, fluency is the ability to express yourself naturally and understand others with ease. It's not about being perfect, it's about communication and connection. If you can make yourself understood and understand others without too much effort, that's fluency.
I totally agree. But getting there can feel like a huge mountain to climb. So let's dive into some of the strategies that can help our listeners achieve fluency in their target language.
Let's start with one of the most important aspects immersion. When you're surrounded by a language, you're forced to use it, hear it, and think in it. That's one of the fastest ways to build fluency.
Immersion is key, but not everyone can just pack up and move to a country where their target language is spoken. So, how can you create an immersive environment right where you are?
There are actually a lot of ways to do that. For example, you can change the language settings on your phone and social media accounts to your target language. It's a small change, but it makes a big difference because it forces you to interact with the language regularly.
That's a great tip. Another thing I've found helpful is consuming media in the target language. Watching movies, listening to music, or tuning into podcasts can expose you to the language in a natural way. Plus, it's fun.
And let's not forget about reading, whether it's news articles, books, or even just social media posts. Reading helps you pick up on sentence structure, vocabulary, and idiomatic expressions. It's a different kind of immersion that can really complement listening and speaking practice.
Absolutely. Speaking of speaking, though, that's often the part that scares people the most. Actually, using the language. It can be intimidating to start talking, especially with native speakers.
For sure. But the thing is, you've got to practice speaking if you want to get better at it. And here's where language exchange partners or conversation groups come in handy.
Language exchange is a brilliant idea. You can find a partner who speaks your target language and wants to learn your language. You help each other out, and it's a win win situation. There are so many apps and websites that can help you find a language exchange partner nowadays.
Right, and it's great because it's low pressure. You're both learners, so you understand the challenges each other faces. Plus, it's a great way to make friends from different cultures.
That's true. And if you're really shy about speaking, you can start with shadowing. It's a technique where you listen to a recording in your target language and try to repeat what you hear in real time. It helps with pronunciation and getting comfortable with the rhythm of the language.
Shadowing is fantastic. It can feel a bit weird at first, but it's incredibly effective. You're training your brain and mouth to work together in the new language, which is a huge part of becoming fluent.
And don't forget about the importance of grammar and vocabulary. While fluency is more than just knowing the rules, having a good grasp of grammar helps you construct sentences correctly. And the more vocabulary you know, the easier it is to express yourself.
That's where things like flashcards and spaced repetition systems, SRS, come in handy. These tools help you memorize vocabulary and phrases more effectively over time.
Oh, definitely. I love using apps like Anki for vocabulary. It's so satisfying to see those cards turn green as you master them. But it's also important to learn vocabulary in context, not just as isolated words.
Absolutely. Context is everything. That's why I always recommend learning phrases or sentences rather than just single words. When you learn in context, you're more likely to remember how to use the word correctly.
That's a great point. And while we're on the topic of learning in context, interacting with native speakers as much as possible is so beneficial. They can give you feedback on your usage and help you understand the nuances of the language.
And that brings us to another important point: not being afraid to make mistakes. It's inevitable when you're learning a new language, but it's also one of the best ways to learn. When you make a mistake and get corrected, you're more likely to remember the right way to say it.
Yes, making mistakes is part of the process. No one expects you to be perfect, especially native speakers. They appreciate the effort you're making to learn their language, and most are more than happy to help you out.
Exactly. So, if you're out there listening and feeling hesitant about speaking up because you're afraid of making mistakes, remember that those mistakes are stepping stones to fluency.
Absolutely. And another thing that can really help is setting specific, achievable goals. Fluency is a long term goal, but breaking it down into smaller, manageable goals can keep you motivated.
Definitely. It could be something like, this month, I'm going to learn 100 new words, or I'm going to have a 5-minute conversation in my target language every day. These smaller goals add up over time and keep you moving forward.
And tracking your progress is key. Whether it's through a language learning app, a journal, or even just ticking off goals on a list, seeing how far you've come can be really motivating.
100%. And don't forget to celebrate those wins, no matter how small they seem. Every step forward is progress, and it's important to acknowledge that.
Yes, give yourself credit for the hard work you're putting in. Language learning is challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. So, enjoy the journey.
Speaking of the journey, another thing I wanted to mention is the importance of being patient and consistent. Fluency doesn't happen overnight. It's about putting in the time and effort regularly.
That's true. Consistency is key. Even if you only have 10 or 15 minutes a day to dedicate to your language studies, that time adds up. The important thing is to keep going, even when it feels like you're not making progress.
And there will be times when it feels like you're stuck or not improving. That's completely normal. Language learning isn't always a linear process. There will be ups and downs, but the key is to keep pushing through.
Definitely. And during those tough times, it can be helpful to mix things up. If you're feeling stuck, try a new learning method, listen to a different podcast, or find a new conversation partner. Sometimes a change in routine can reignite your motivation.
That's such good advice. It's easy to fall into a rut with language learning, especially if you're doing the same thing every day. But keeping things fresh can make a big difference.
And speaking of keeping things fresh, don't forget to have fun with it. Fluency is a serious goal, but that doesn't mean your learning process has to be all serious all the time. Find ways to enjoy the language, whether that's through games, music, or even just chatting with
That's
friends.
so important. The more you enjoy the process, the more likely you are to stick with it. So, find what you love about the language and make that a big part of your learning journey.
Absolutely. And remember, everyone's journey to fluency is different. There's no one size fits all approach. It's about finding what works best for you and being patient with yourself as you progress.
Well said, Sarah. So, to sum up, fluency is achievable for anyone who's willing to put in the time and effort. It's about immersion, practicing regularly, learning in context, and most importantly, not being afraid to make mistakes.
Exactly. And with the right mindset and tools, anyone can become fluent in a new language. So, to all our listeners out there, keep going, keep learning, and most importantly, enjoy the journey.
We hope you found today's episode helpful.
Absolutely, Alex. Now, something we touched on earlier that I think we should dive deeper into is the importance of pronunciation. It's often overlooked, but being able to pronounce words correctly is crucial for being understood, especially in the early stages of language learning.
Oh, definitely. Pronunciation is one of those things that can make a huge difference in how confident you feel when speaking. If you're not confident about how to pronounce words, it can hold you back from actually using the language.
Exactly. And improving pronunciation doesn't just help with speaking, it also enhances your listening skills. When you understand how sounds are produced, you start to recognize them more easily when native speakers use them.
That's a great point. A lot of languages have sounds that don't exist in our native tongues, so getting comfortable with those sounds is key. One technique that's really helpful is phonetic training. You can use tools like the International Phonetic Alphabet to learn the exact pronunciation of sounds in your target language.
Yes, the IPA can seem intimidating at first, but it's such a powerful tool. Once you get the hang of it, you can look up any word and know exactly how to pronounce it. Plus, there are lots of online resources and apps that make learning the IPA easier.
Another technique that's super useful is recording yourself speaking. It can be a bit uncomfortable at first, but it's one of the best ways to catch mistakes and improve your pronunciation.
That's so true. When you record yourself and then listen back, you can hear where you're not quite hitting the mark. It's like giving yourself instant feedback. Plus, over time, you'll be able to hear your progress, which is really motivating.
And if you combine that with mimicking native speakers, it can be incredibly effective. Try to imitate their intonation, rhythm, and even the way they use their mouth to form sounds. It's almost like you're training your mouth to get used to the new language.
Mimicking is such a powerful technique. It's like learning an instrument. You're training your muscles to produce the right sounds. And over time, it becomes more natural. Speaking of which, let's not forget about the role of intonation and stress in pronunciation.
Yes, intonation and stress are so important. In many languages, the meaning of a word or sentence can change entirely, depending on how you stress certain syllables or words. Getting the intonation right helps you sound more natural and makes it easier for native speakers to understand you.
Exactly. A lot of language learners focus so much on getting the words right that they forget about how those words should sound in a sentence. But native speakers often rely on intonation to convey meaning, so it's really worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. And to improve intonation and stress, I'd recommend listening to a lot of native content, whether that's podcasts, audiobooks, or just regular conversations. Pay attention to how the speaker's voice rises and falls, and where they put emphasis in sentences.
Yes, and something that really helps with that is singing along to songs in your target language. Music is a great way to get a feel for the rhythm and flow of a language. Plus, it's just plain fun.
Oh, I love that tip. Singing forces you to follow the natural intonation patterns and can really help with pronunciation. Plus, it's a great way to learn new vocabulary and phrases in context.
Definitely. And another thing that's often overlooked is the cultural aspect of language learning. Understanding the culture behind the language can give you insights into why certain phrases are used or how people interact. It's not just about the words, but also about how they're used in different situations.
That's such a good point, Sarah. Language and culture are deeply intertwined. The more you understand the culture, the more you'll understand the nuances of the language. Things like body language, gestures, and social norms can vary greatly from one culture to another, and being aware of these can really enhance your fluency.
Yes. For example, in some cultures, it's common to be more direct, while in others, people might use more indirect language to avoid confrontation. Understanding these cultural nuances helps you use the language more appropriately and can make your interactions more successful.
Exactly. And you can immerse yourself in the culture even if you're not in a country where the language is spoken. You can read about the culture, watch movies or documentaries, and even cook traditional dishes. It all adds up and enriches your language learning experience.
That's such a great idea. Plus, it makes the learning process more engaging. When you connect with the culture, the language becomes more than just words. It becomes a living, breathing part of your life.
Right, and that connection is what ultimately leads to true fluency. It's not just about speaking the language, but also about feeling comfortable and confident using it in real life situations.
Exactly. And another thing that's important is developing a routine that works for you. Everyone's learning style is different, so it's crucial to find a method that keeps you motivated and consistent.
That's so true. Some people might thrive with a structured routine, like studying for an hour every morning, while others might prefer a more flexible approach, fitting in language practice throughout the day whenever they can.
Exactly. The key is to find what works best for you and stick with it. Consistency is more important than the amount of time you spend each day. Even if it's just 10 minutes a day, those small efforts add up over time.
Definitely. And don't be afraid to experiment with different methods. What works for one person might not work for another. So, if you find that one method isn't clicking with you, try something else. The important thing is to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. And remember, it's okay to take breaks and come back to it with fresh energy. Language learning is a marathon, not a sprint. It's important to avoid burnout by pacing yourself and enjoying the process.
Well said, Sarah. And one last thing I want to touch on is the importance of self belief. So many people struggle with fluency, not because they lack the ability, but because they doubt themselves. Believing that you can become fluent is half the battle.
That's such an important point, Alex. Confidence in your ability to learn and use the language is crucial. It's normal to feel self doubt at times, but remember that everyone who's ever learned a language has gone through those same feelings.
Absolutely. So, to everyone listening, believe in yourself, stay consistent, and most importantly, enjoy the journey. Fluency is within your reach if you keep working at
Couldn't
it.
have said it better myself, Alex. Thanks for such a great conversation today. I hope our listeners found these tips helpful and feel inspired to continue their language learning journey.
Me too. And remember, we're all in this together. If you ever need support or have any questions, reach out to us. We're here to help you achieve your fluency goals.
Some questions and answers related to the topic of gaining fluency in a language, along with detailed explanations.
Why is pronunciation important in language learning?
Pronunciation is crucial because it directly impacts how well others can understand you when you speak. Even if you have a large vocabulary and strong grammar skills, poor pronunciation can lead to misunderstandings. Additionally, mastering pronunciation helps improve your listening skills, as it makes it easier to recognize and understand spoken language. Explanation. When learning a new language, each sound in the language may not exist in your native language. This can make it difficult to produce and recognize these sounds. By focusing on pronunciation, you train your mouth and ears to get used to the language's unique sounds and intonation patterns. This not only improves your spoken communication, but also your ability to comprehend native speakers.
What are some effective techniques for improving pronunciation?
Some effective techniques include phonetic training, recording yourself speaking, mimicking native speakers, and practicing intonation and stress. Explanation, phonetic training, learning the International Phonetic Alphabet, IPA, can help you understand how to produce specific sounds in your target language. Recording yourself. By recording and listening to your own speech, you can identify areas where your pronunciation needs improvement. Mimicking native speakers. Imitating the speech patterns, intonation, and mouth movements of native speakers helps your pronunciation sound more natural. Intonation and stress practice. Understanding where to place emphasis in sentences and how to vary your pitch can make you sound more fluent and expressive.
How can understanding the culture of a language improve fluency?
Understanding the culture behind a language provides context for how the language is used, including idiomatic expressions, social norms, and communication styles. This cultural insight helps you use the language more appropriately and naturally in different situations. Explanation. Language is deeply connected to culture. For example, the way people greet each other, express emotions, or address social hierarchies can vary significantly across cultures. By learning about the culture, you gain a better understanding of the subtleties and nuances of the language. This cultural awareness also helps you avoid misunderstandings and communicate more effectively in real-life situations.
What role does repetition play in language learning?
Repetition is key to retaining information and building long-term memory of vocabulary, grammar rules, and pronunciation. Explanation. When you repeatedly expose yourself to new words, phrases, or concepts, you strengthen the neural connections associated with that information. This makes it easier to recall and use the language in conversation. Tools like spaced repetition systems, SRS, are particularly effective because they schedule reviews at intervals designed to optimize memory retention. By revisiting material just before you forget it, you ensure that it stays fresh in your mind.
What is spaced repetition and how does it benefit language learners?
Spaced repetition is a learning technique that involves reviewing information at increasing intervals over time. This method is based on the idea that you should review material just as you're about to forget it, which strengthens your memory and helps with long-term retention. Explanation. Spaced repetition benefits language learners by making the review process more efficient. Instead of cramming, you review material at spaced intervals, which is more in line with how the brain naturally remembers information. For example, after learning a new word, you might review it the next day, then a few days later, then a week later, and so on. This spacing helps transfer the information from short-term to the long-term memory.
How can mnemonics help with language learning?
Mnemonics are memory aids that help you remember new information by creating associations between the new word or concept and something familiar or easy to recall. Explanation. Mnemonics work by linking the unfamiliar with the familiar. For example, if you're learning the French word for apple, which is pomme, you might picture a palm holding an apple. This visual association makes it easier to remember the word. Mnemonics can be visual, auditory, or even kinesthetic, depending on what works best for you. They are particularly helpful for memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules because they make abstract information more concrete and memorable.
What is the value of language journaling and how should it be practiced?
Language journaling involves writing regularly in your target language. It's valuable because it reinforces vocabulary and grammar in a meaningful context, helps with sentence construction, and allows you to track your progress over time. Explanation. To practice language journaling, set aside time each day or week to write about your thoughts, experiences, or even summaries of what you've learned. Start with simple sentences and gradually build up to more complex structures. Don't worry about making mistakes. Use them as learning opportunities. Over time, journaling helps you internalize the language, making it easier to recall and use in conversation. It also boosts your confidence as you see how much your writing improves.
Why is it important to set milestones in language learning?
Setting milestones is important because it gives you clear goals to work towards, keeps you motivated, and allows you to measure your progress. Explanation. Language learning is a long-term commitment, and without specific goals, it can be easy to lose motivation. By setting milestones, such as learning a certain number of vocabulary words, being able to hold a basic conversation, or understanding a movie without subtitles, you give yourself something tangible to aim for. Achieving these milestones provides a sense of accomplishment and encourages you to continue. Celebrating these achievements, no matter how small, keeps you motivated and helps maintain momentum.
How does focused practice differ from general practice in language learning?
Focused practice involves concentrating on specific areas of the language where you have difficulties, whereas general practice might cover a broad range of skills without a specific focus. Explanation. Focused practice is like targeted training. If you know you struggle with verb conjugations, for example, dedicating time specifically to practice and drill those forms will help you overcome that challenge. On the other hand, general practice might involve using the language in a variety of contexts without focusing on one particular aspect. Both are important, But focused practice helps you address this and improve weaker areas more quickly and effectively.
What are some ways to stay motivated during the language learning process?
Staying motivated can be achieved by setting clear goals, celebrating small victories, diversifying learning methods, and connecting with the language's culture and community. Explanation: motivation is key to long term success in language learning. By setting clear, achievable goals, you give yourself something to strive for. Celebrating small victories, like understanding a song lyric or holding a short conversation, keeps your spirits high. Diversifying your learning methods, such as mixing textbooks with apps, games, and conversation practice, prevents boredom and keeps you engaged. Finally, connecting with the culture through media, food, or travel, and finding a community of learners or native speakers to interact with can make the process more enjoyable and meaningful,